For our next chat, we will be discussing the building blocks of trust, guidelines for ecosystem development in blockchain. Our speakers will be David, ecosystem development leader at Tron, Min, global head of ecosystem growth at Algorand Foundation, Irene, head of strategy at Layer Zero, and Beniamin, founder and CEO of Multiverse X, moderated by Artem from Oak Invest. Please welcome them to the stage with a warm round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming here. We are going to have a great panel. We have some great panelists here. Pretty excited about this one because we have some layer ones, we have some protocols which help the collaboration between different layers. So let's just start by presenting each other.
Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Irene, and I am head of strategy at Layer Zero Labs.
Hello there. It's really great to be in France. Beniamin Mincu, founder and CEO of Multiverse X.
Hi, everyone. This is Min. I'm the head of ecosystem growth at the Algorand Foundation.
Good morning. It's great to be here in Paris. My name's Dave. I lead ecosystem development at Tron.
Thank you, everyone. So just to start with, let's talk about some problems that we have, because we have three different infrastructure layers here, so three L1s, as we call it. And we have layer zero here. So the problem today is that we have so many blockchains. We have L2s now, and the problem with all of this is that we have a lot of liquidity, which is basically all around every blockchain, and we have this problem of fragmentation. And so how can you deal with it? What are the solutions today? So it's for this one is for you, Irene.
Absolutely. Thank you for such a thoughtful question. I think today more so than ever we have this issue of fragmentation of liquidity across multiple blockchains, and then even more fragmented across multiple DEXs. And so our belief at Layer Zero is that cross-chain infrastructure will solve this problem. For example, DEXs can pull from liquidity across multiple blockchains using a messaging protocol, in this case, Layer Zero, which enables communication between smart contracts on different chains. And so our belief is that this really is a multi-chain present and will continue to be a multi-chain future. And so piping and base infrastructure like Layer Zero is meant to empower each of these chains to pull liquidity and users from what were previously siloed ecosystems.
Thank you, Irene. And now let's go into the topic. So we have three L1s. Let's talk about competitiveness. Let's talk about collaborations. Let's talk about what you can do together. What do you think is the most important in our space? Should it be, hey, I have more users, I have more TVL, or should it be like, hey, let's do something together, we can work out something? So what is your opinion on what brings the most value in the ecosystem? Let's start with David. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think those are mutually exclusive ideas or items, right? I think you can have competition as well as collaboration, and I think that's the way it should be in this space.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think we are not big enough, I think, to be competing against one another. I think that we need to work together collectively and collaborate and figure out how to grow this ecosystem together. And I think we embrace that. We have to embrace it in a way that is meaningful for our own ecosystems, but also effective for everyone else. And I guess, one example I will give is there's a project in our ecosystem called Folks Finance that is doing liquid governance. We have a unique sort of governance system in Algorand, and they're going to be bridging this liquid governance over into BNB. And what's beautiful about that is it allows users on Binance to, for the first time, be able to access governance rewards on Algorand, and vice versa. It allows our users within the Algorand ecosystem to finally be able to have something to do on another chain, to experience that ecosystem. And I just think it's really important that we embrace that innovation.
What we've thought a lot about at Multiverse X is what's the right kind of question here? And it seems that depending on what you're trying to achieve, the strategy is very, very different. So here, it seems people generally get stuck in the immediate thing. So if they find themselves fighting between each other, losing energy and so forth, they usually forget about the big question, which is perhaps the most important one. How do we onboard the next billion users? Because the interesting thing is you have a very small pie, you might fight with everyone else, but that's a losing battle. That's a zero-sum game. What we discovered and have focused all the energy on is building the right kind of tools, whether it's very high performance, low latency, high bandwidth architecture, or whether it's user experience unlike any other, that are necessary to onboard really large amount of users. Because this is essentially what's the most important thing for everyone. This is so funny because even the thieves, even your enemies would want the same strategy. If the pie grows sufficiently large, exchanges, other protocols, other basically competitors all have a much larger market to address, to conquer, and so forth. So it also seems that if we do this right, and this has to do with both performance and user experience, you basically have a completely different game that you're playing, aligning towards, and everything else seems a distraction. Unless we can bring that number of users, we are in this iterative processes, interim stages, until we reach the point where it really makes sense and for which we actually have built the entire set of technologies.
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've been asked a lot over the past few weeks my opinion of the flooding of venture investment into AI and the departure from crypto as a space, and also just general tech interest in crypto. And I think my stance on this really is that the amount of capital in the space has remained the same. It isn't necessarily the broad down market that is leading to the lessening of interest, but I think our pursuit of true product market fit, or actual products that end users at the scale of billions rather than 10,000 committed DeFi degens, is ever more important. It's fairly out of touch with reality to assume that there will be a billion, let alone 100,000 new people who will care about the complexities of particular blockchains. I think if you've spoken to your childhood best friend in a long time, or your mother, for example, the last thing they want to care about is the difference between Polygon and Avalanche. So how can we use infrastructure to empower developers to create experiences that abstract away the complexities of individual chains? In the same way that if you think about the early 80s when the intranet was becoming the internet, of course there was a community of early developers who were excited about the underlying technology, but then when there was the broadening of the space in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was because we could focus more on the end product and abstract away, like I said, that complexity. And so there are important, really tactical pieces to this, which could be eliminating the need to go to a centralized exchange and get 5 different gas tokens to transact across 5 different chains, which is where omni-chain and cross-chain come into this again. But I also think that just focusing on the onboarding experience and eliminating churn is also incredibly important. And so when you're developing a protocol or trying to incentivize developers to join your ecosystem, how can you do so in a way that empowers them to abstract away the particular nature of your chain? So rather than being a Polygon-based DEX or a Tron-based game, it can just be a game, or it could just be a financial tool.
Sure. Let me follow up on that. So when I look at a collaboration with or partnership with another company, I'm really thinking about how that particular collaboration will impact the rest of our ecosystem. So we look at our ecosystem in 3 parts. being consumers, projects, and Web 2 corporate partnerships. And when I want to onboard a new partnership, you really have to think about it almost in a holistic sense of how does that partnership impact the rest of the ecosystem, and what does it mean for the rest of the ecosystem, right? So I want to bring something on board that will enhance the experience for the broader community versus only something that is there just for them. But at the same time, I don't want to downplay the idea of competition in the space. Getting back to kind of the liquidity situation, right? The way a DEX can improve their liquidity is to provide a better service than their peers, right? That they're still, just because it's Web3 and new technology doesn't mean the traditional rules of business don't exist anymore, right? You still have to provide a better service, and if you want to have more liquidity, you have to attract more users than your peers. And even if there are, pipes and interconnectedness between DEXs, I don't know that necessarily one DEX A, might want to share that liquidity with DEX B, right? That might not be in their best interest. So, while collaboration is important, I believe in a multi-chain world, multi-chain future, you can't downplay the need or the impact of competitiveness.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from all of you is that basically you should focus on the best product you can ever build that will give you this competitive edge. And then on the other hand, the partnerships and the collaboration are still important if it brings value to your product, not just liquidity or whatever it is. And so still, we'll remain in this topic about liquidity because we've seen during the bull market that lots of protocols had really high TVLs, lots of blockchains launched during this bull market, and we've seen that there was a lot of incentivization. So basically, we are giving tokens out for free to everyone, and so you can come to our blockchain, and you will have more yield than anywhere else. And so the question that I would have during a bear market, how do you attract liquidity? Because you cannot give out tokens anymore, nobody cares, and your token will just go down at some point. So how do you bring more money, more TVL to your blockchain during these times?
What I would say is this goes back to the second question, the question before. If you have not solved a way to bring in new users in a very simple way, it seems you're basically dead. You're essentially not seeing it because you're confined to this very closed loop game with a few people that change money from one hand to another. On the other hand, irrespective of how the market may be, it may be really great, it may be really bad. The question is, do you have a flywheel through which you can very easily onboard new users, give them an experience, have utility? And we've done something remarkable with Exportal, which you'll probably see a QR code on some of the backs of the seats, where we believe that because the most important thing is to onboard the next billion users, it is so valuable for some of the other protocols to benefit of this type of user experience that it's not that we don't recognize the idea of being competitive. In fact, we recognize that we've beaten almost anyone in the market to this game of user experience, and it's at this point so valuable not only for us but also for them to play along that they have a net positive which is very huge. They can get new users, engage them a lot simpler, and this is why some of the top protocols in the world are approaching us to have some very strategic conversations, because when you're discussing in a language that is very much technical and let's say takes away the accessibility that normal users might have, then you're already creating a very narrow market that you're addressing. When on the other hand you have a user experience that is very much Apple-like, where it's very easy, very cool, you have AI avatars, you have of course digital assets, cards, but the language that you use is so simple that the average user can interact with it, can benefit of it, can have some fun, then you're already discussing about a different type of market. And so this is where I see not only the path forward, but the great path of collaborations that can be strategic, that can bring other applications like liquidity, DEXs, or any type of applications, because you have this layer of user experience that can give you the opportunity of at least having some conversations. Otherwise, it almost seems like you're confined to heat death. You just don't see it yet.
Let's try to keep the mics a little bit closer because I think that people might not hear what you're saying. It's really interesting, so.
Sure.
Nice.
Next time.
Nice.
I think one thing I would add to that is for us, we should think about DeFi as one slice, right, of our overall ecosystem. And so I think when you talk about liquidity in DeFi, of course, users are incented with financial incentives and yields. But I think if you can bring utility into the overall ecosystem, that is going to naturally incent users to then want to participate in DeFi protocols and earn yield. So I think it's, if you just think about the financial incentives, you're just playing a hard game, right? Everybody's just going to, it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. But if you really think about bringing utility overall to the users, I think that's how you incentivize users to get into liquidity.
Yeah, I love what you said there, bringing utility to your user base. And at Tron, now we have over 160 million accounts, and probably at the start of the bear market, I don't know how many we had, 125 million, 130 million. So we've grown strongly throughout the bear market, and that's because we provide a very unique utility to users around the world, and it's something that clearly people find to be valuable, and they find that it's something they need and can use in their everyday life. We have over 2 million daily active users, which for a blockchain is incredibly high. And that's because people are finding a way to use it in their day-to-day life, right? And that's in a bear market.
Yeah, we've talked about this with Justin yesterday, actually. So the idea of Tron being used a lot for stablecoins, I think that 95% of TVL of Tron is actually composed of stablecoins.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
we've been
I
referred
looked it
to
up like 1 week ago. So, and his answer was, yes, we will focus on stablecoins because it's one of the main parts of the ecosystem. And I think that's why you have so many active users. Because, for example, if I transfer my USDC or USDT from one exchange to another, I will use Tron.
Yes, that's right. For stablecoins, now probably over 60% of Tether trades on Tron, and over probably 30% of the total stablecoin market trades on Tron as well. And Visa has referred to Tron as the stablecoin superhighway, and that's really what it is. And that all relates back to becoming the global settlement layer. And I think that's how we do that, and that's really what we're pushing towards.
Perfect. Let's get to the most controversial topic of this panel. Let's talk about token prices. So, is the token price important for a project to succeed? Really simple.
In my view, no. I think it doesn't matter what your token price is if you don't have a good business, a viable product in the market, right? Even if it's high, it won't last, right? So it's much better to develop and focus on building that unique business with a competitive advantage than worrying about your token price. If your business is doing good things, the token price will follow.
I will say that I'm not going to comment on the token price specifically, but token price does matter for a project to be able to fund operations if that project is taking payment in that token, right? So I think we have to be conscious and accept the fact that for certain projects that are building in the ecosystem that are accepting the token, it does impact their ability to operate. I think outside of sort of thinking about it in terms of funding operations, I think token price is a distraction. And it is noise because it prevents us from thinking about the real thing that matters, which is a long-term growth and success of the ecosystem. So I think it's one of those things where you have to recognize the actual real day impact, but also remember what's really important.
Beniamin?
I would still say this is very much a trap question, but I will engage just for the, let's say, benefit of the audience.
For the sake of the entertainment.
Yeah. Maybe a good way of rephrasing the question and just being very reductionist about it is imagine an economy and then the currency of the economy, just people debating whether the currency matters or not. You should be a bit ludicrous to say the currency doesn't matter. You would be very quickly dead if you would in practice believe it doesn't matter. The question is, how do you engage on this topic in a way where it does not kill you because you become focused on the wrong things, and then at the same time recognize that, for instance, depending on who you would ask, if you would ask the Bitcoin guys, they would obviously tell you this is the most important force for them. It's correlated, macro, so forth. The entire news around Bitcoin, notice, it's not about adoption, not about the technology, not about whatever, it's religion and the price, sort of. If you ask Ethereum, of course, Ethereum has this narrative about the software, the different applications, adoption, and so forth, but the hidden open truth that no one talks about is that all the applications are supercharged when the economy goes well. When you have a bull market and so forth, you see incomparable adoption. Now coming back to our point, if you zoom out, if the token price does extremely well, just zoom out sufficiently enough and you see crypto exceeding or overriding the power of nations, of continents, and literally creating a parallel economy that is bridged and so forth. On the other hand, if it doesn't work out, you just see death. So however good the technology, if you cannot survive, if for some reason value is not captured by the token and you have broken economics and so forth, you're going to die. So the point is, it definitely matters. In the short term, you never want to bet on stuff like this because the market is super irrational. It's a manic depressive that literally kills you, and the closer you look, you lose sight and you'll lose almost everything you have. But in the long term, of course, it matters extraordinarily, and you just want to see price as this information mechanism that on a second-by-second basis revalidates some belief, hypothesis, fundamentals. If you understand and play things like that, then there's an entire engineering discussion about how you might play economics, how you might tie them to the utility, to the adoption, and all of that.
Do you want to come in on that, or?
We don't currently have a token. So
Not especially about your token, but okay. So it was a trick question, I know this, but I think that we have to take it into account lots of things. I think that the price might reflect the success of a token because people are more interested, people are more buying this token, but it doesn't have to be high to succeed. I think the two things, they're basically a consequence of a good project. It means that people are more willing to buy this. And I also think that the price matters, for example, for blockchains where you have governance, because otherwise it's really simple to overtake governance. If you look at Cosmos ecosystem, where the governance is amongst the highest, it's really important to not drop below a certain point, because otherwise you can just take over the governance and basically take over all the protocols that you have on it. Speaking of governance, we are seeing that, for example, Uniswap has a participation rate of 0.something%, which is ridiculous. It's really low. And so today,
Why do you think that is?
well, first of all, I think that the problem with Uniswap is that they had lots of investors, and people are looking at these wallets of investors which hold a lot of tokens. And basically, if these investors would vote, then yeah, the participation rate would go up. But then on the other hand, it means that the protocol is basically owned by VCs, like basically a couple VCs. So I think that's one of the points where you have this. And so my question to you was, how do you incentivize participation in governance without having these incentives, token incentives? And I think you can come up with all
I'm
that.
happy to speak to this. Layer Zero Labs built and launched a protocol called Stargate. It's been live for over a year now, and Stargate is a liquidity transport protocol meant to solve the problem of bootstrapping liquidity for developers. So it's actually very relevant to our conversation today. And if you look at all of the DAOs across the ecosystem, Stargate is actually the most active one, more active than Aave, Uniswap, MakerDAO. We have, I think last I checked, 314,000 active users, and the average voting amount per proposal is around 200,000 unique voters. So really, really high engagement. And I think there are some basic things you can do to incentivize more involvement. One is just lowering the barrier to entry here. And so you mentioned a protocol that has around 50 delegates that command all of the voting power. In encouraging just everyday users to get a part of that is really important. And so that means not requiring deep technical knowledge. We had a conversation about some really fantastic delegates for other protocols like Aave who want to empower everyday users and will take on the engineering burden of actualizing their visions. I also think things like regular community calls matter a lot. So for Stargate, we do monthly community calls, and we invite users to come up and speak. Our own founders there sharing ideas. It's very casual and sort of just jamming on things that we find interesting. And I think even just having an excellent community manager plays a huge role in all of this. So we're super fortunate that the Stargate community is really active, and I think it serves a model as to how invested you should be in getting a higher participation rate in your protocol.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Mark Zeller is part of the Aave team, and he's deploying his initiative, which is called Aave-chan. And basically, it allows people that don't know how to code to still submit improvement proposals for the protocol that he will then deploy. It's a little bit more complex than that, but just so we get the idea. Basically, it allows everyday people that use the protocol but don't know how to code or don't know how to implement it, to submit their proposal, to go through some checks, and then maybe contribute to the protocol and the improvement of the protocol.
I'll add to that as well, because governance is something that we think about a lot at Algorand, and we have a process, a system of rewarding governors for participating in governance. So you commit your algos, you vote on specific measures, and you are rewarded. So I think we see this as a very important step to decentralization, and so we constantly think about this. And one of the things, Irene, as you talked about community and having just like engagement with the community, I think that's so key. We have a governance advisory committee that we run monthly calls with, and we take input from them to think about how best to think about what's the next step in governance. And one of the initiatives that took place before this is an initiative called XGovs, which is expert governance, basically giving the community the ability to actually submit measures that then gets voted on in the governance period, right? Like, these are, I think there's no one silver bullet, but the idea of engaging with the community and hearing what they want, I think is certainly the way to think about active participation. For sure.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, actually. Because regulation is such a big topic, particularly in the US, how is the industry going to be regulated? What's going on? And I think that really the path forward is self-regulation. And that would come through a higher participation rate. And to have self-regulation, people need to step up and take part in that, right? That's part of being in the crypto industry. And if you don't want to be dictated to with regulations that were designed 100 years ago for situations that certainly aren't as dynamic as crypto, then self-regulation, I think, is the best path forward, and that really requires greater participation. Also, just on the community side, I completely agree. Having a great community manager is critical. Engaging with the community as much as possible is such a key part of blockchain initiatives. Certainly, it's a key part of Tron. We are always reaching out and engaging with our community as much as possible.
What I would add is having a great community is really awesome. Of course, all the other components, cultivating the community, engaging, doing all that is definitely important. But if you look at governance, it seems 2 points will, I believe, almost completely change the conversation, engagement and interaction and all of that. One is UX. So for most of the people in the world, even when you're saying governance, like, what are we discussing about? This is such a foreign concept that they literally don't understand what it means, how they can do it. And it's so interesting that we usually discuss about the very high-level, sophisticated concepts and all of that, and most people are dead on the first step. Like, they don't know what it does, what they can do, how they can engage, and it's, even if they understand it conceptually, there's no simple path to that. So I do believe that once we have a one-tap version of that, where you can see the story, where you can see the proposal, where you can engage, and this is what we're trying to do with Exportal, the super app, then the entire conversation for all protocols will just change, because people can all of a sudden interact and do all this engagement in a simple way. Then AI will probably completely change this, just because it adds an even simpler layer of UX. So if I, through an AI agent, if I can engage, have the conversation, get explanations on what's the proposal, what's the simpler version of it, why does it matter for me, and so forth, again, the entire conversation has changed, because it's almost like I'm at this coffee with a friend that tells me the entire conversation, and there's no literal barrier for me to engage. Now, I still do believe that suppose that you solve UX completely, unless you have skin in the game and an incentive for you to see either improvements or impact or some beneficial things that would come as outcomes. Even if it's the simplest thing, if you believe it's trivial and the outcome doesn't matter, you won't engage. Just look at current countries with the engagement in politics and all of that. So if you have a game that makes sense with high impact, you have simple UX to interact with the game, and you believe that your input can contribute, then you'll double, triple the engagement in a way that will almost happen overnight, as long as people understand and can play with it.
You made an interesting point about comparing governments, national governments, to DAOs, and I think that the integrity of the actual foundation and the execution of proposals that pass and engagement with delegates matters a lot. And there have been instances of protocol governance in which the actual integrity and structure of their governance itself is not to our highest standard. And
yeah,
so,
it was not so long ago as well.
Yeah, no, of course. And so I think it makes sense that there is criticism around our entire industry for the actual sophistication of decentralization and governance. And then I think something else on the point of user experience is one low-hanging fruit is if your protocol is deployed on multiple chains, your governance should be cross-chain. Users should be able to vote and engage from their home chain and the gas tokens they're most comfortable with, and the actual votes and execution can settle on mainnet. And Layer 0 actually enables that. We have a cross-chain governance module, and it's incredibly lightweight to implement. So that's one way you can lower that barrier.
Yeah, and I think you made a really interesting point, Beniamin, when you said, when you talked about the governance. People just don't care We see that in France, people don't even go to vote for their next president. Why would they care about where they put their Pepe money in? You know, I think.
Question is why?
Yeah, but I think still like because it takes time, because you have to stay up to date, because you have to go through the proposals for the election, you have to go through the programs of all the of all the candidates as well. So I think people just don't take time to do this.
Let me make the counter example. If Musk would come here and tomorrow would announce that he would be a candidate for president here in France, how many people do you think would go to vote all of a sudden?
Yeah, but then we're talking about influence. So he has a high influence. I believe
He's a
that
good
Elon,
influencer?
well, I mean, he bought Twitter, right? So he kind of is the ultimate influencer. But I think this would increase the amount of people who vote, but because it's a completely different situation. And so let's still remain on governance a little bit, because it's still part of the topic, but let's talk about adoption as well. So today the two highest priorities for the blockchains are adoption for all of them and decentralization for some of them. It's not always the case. It can become more decentralized over time. So what do you think that the blockchains or the protocol should focus on? Should it be adoption first and then decentralization, or first decentralization so we can get the adoption?
Another trap question?
Both.
I'll speak as a sort of former engineer coming from the computer science background. I think it's really important that if you're launching a new chain and ecosystem, that you prioritize the developer experience. You can't actually have a diversified array of use cases and products if you don't have the best engineers and the best product designers building in your ecosystem. And so having that base infrastructure there, having that support from even things as simple as excellent documentation, which we as a chain agnostic protocol and a protocol that engages with all of the ecosystems on this stage and many others, we've observed some ecosystems that have really world-class documentation. And what I hear from college dropouts that are building their protocol right now is that makes a difference. So developer experience is really key.
Our CTO is sitting in the front row, and a developer experience is literally like the thing that he says on repeat. And it's so important for us as well. And I guess I was kind of joking when I said both, but I do think that if you have adoption, you will get decentralization, right? As you get more people building, as you get more users using, and if your consensus mechanism is set up, if your governance mechanism is set up, you will, I think the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I can't say enough about having a great developer experience. I think that is critical to attracting people to your chain. Just over the past year, we've added a role of developer relations who's always working with new people coming on board. We're adding developers in the US. So we're very focused on making developing on Tron the best experiences possible, not only in the US, but around the world.
What I would add is that, again, it seems the question needs a kind of clarification on the objective, because for the different protocols, you have very different objectives. For instance, of course, since Bitcoin essentially has stopped innovating in some sense on the technology side, of course, they want the doctrine of decentralization to be a kind of holy doctrine. No other discussion is allowed, and this is how you disqualify some of the other competitors. But in a much more pragmatic approach, I think you want to take a look at: do you want to achieve large-scale blockchain adoption? If that's the objective, then of course you'll ask, what's the priority? Of course you want decentralization, of course you want adoption, but what's the first? What's the chicken? What's the egg? And it seems like, again, if you're taking this just reductionist approach, you can immediately see that you might have 5 people. They're really smart, they're really cool, and then you're fully decentralized. But there's nothing happening. You have no progress, everything takes very, very long, no engagement, the community cannot adopt the technology. On the other hand, of course, if you have UX, you have performance, you can offer some utility with use cases to the users. Then you can have the conversation about adoption because users keep coming in, and then you can also engage them on the idea of governance in a thoughtful, smart, progressive way, because we have to, I think we are so used to our language, even about, let's say, tokens, gas, fees, all the ideas that for a normal user, like he will look at you and say, what are you talking about? This is so natural to us that we've almost lost touch with the simple user version of the world, which I think it's always fresh to take into account and then introduce into the conversation to organize and prioritize some things at different phases of the adoption, let's say, strategy or path.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contribution. So we have a few minutes left. So we still have a couple questions left. And we've seen a lot of new products and new developments for decentralized applications because, for example, now you can buy crypto on Uniswap with your credit card. Before, it was the role of centralized exchanges like Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, etc., etc. So do you think that the centralized exchanges will remain relevant for the industry and will remain essential? Or do you think that over time their role will decrease because we will have some solutions which will be directly integrated within protocols or within blockchains, etc.?
Yeah, I think that space is going to continue to evolve, right? Right now, there are centralized exchanges, and they're a key part of the whole crypto infrastructure. But I think to think the same structure of that market will be the same in 10 years, I think would be a mistake, right? We're going to continue to see innovation, and maybe there will be centralized exchanges, but maybe it will evolve to something that we really haven't thought of yet, right? So, and that goes back to, or gets into at least, regulation. You know, we want there to be greater regulation around these, and at least in the U.S., you know, they're going after these institutions, but you know, they're going to create rules, if they do create rules, for organizations that are going to evolve and change and might not be the same in 5 years or 10 years. So I think there will be a way to trade cryptocurrencies and other assets. I don't know if it will be in the same form that it is now.
And might is a huge understatement. I mean, just for 1 second, I'm just going to paint this, let's say, next phase in whatever finance might look like. And you could call it almost autonomous finance, in the sense that you'll have much more AI agents interacting, creating transactions, automatically generating ideas, value, doing all that. And the most fascinating thing about a blockchain like Multiverse X is that it's not only secure in the sense that you have the transparency, you have the bandwidth to interact with these AI agents, but it's also compatible with the AI agent, in the sense that you will very quickly have a version of that plays across the entire economy, that makes things a lot more interesting. And whether it's exchanges, whether it's liquidity, it will almost become a function of, is this much simpler, much better, much more effective for the user? Then it will be a no-brainer, because you'll just wake up and say, like, what's this other thing? It doesn't tell me anything. I want this simple thing that does something for me while I sleep, takes care of my whatever fees, transactions, food, and then you can interact with it. So I don't think this is 10 years away. So the next 2-3 years will be pretty crazy on this front.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, so let's do one last thing. The question is, what was the hardest thing during this bear market? Each one of you, and you have 1 minute.
Growing the ecosystem with projects and Web2 partnerships.
Yeah, and similarly, not being able to support the projects that we want to support and not being able to give them the financial support, but we have figured out a way to help them in other ways. But that's been really hard. It's been really hard.
Indeed, I think super tough, always nurturing, cultivating, and helping the community of builders, businesses, partners, and so forth process this type of market reactions. Super tough, super difficult, but I'd also say very inevitable in the sense that you cannot bypass it.
I think at Layer 0, we're incredibly fortunate to have the kind of runway that allows us just to focus on supporting developers. But what has been hard is seeing amazing project teams not be able to raise the funding they need. So we're trying to help them get that investment and also bootstrap liquidity using some of the primitives we talked about.
Perfect. So we are done here. Please give it up for the speakers. And thank you for being here.